After Vladimir Putin's recent trip to Pyongyang and the conclusion of a joint security agreement between Russia and North Korea, Seoul is on edge. Experts say the trade between the two countries already violates UN sanctions, making international efforts to curb North Korea's nuclear program and human rights abuses futile.
Now, South Korea was further outraged when Russia agreed to back Kim Jong Un's regime militarily in case of aggression. Now, South Korea is considering arming Kyiv in its defensive war against Russia. Is this yet another miscalculation by Russia?
Now, joining us to discuss is Diane Francis, editor-at-large, Canada's National Post. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us tonight on TVP World.
Glad to be here.
Now, in the lead-in to our segment, we were talking about another gross miscalculation of Vladimir Putin. I think that's where I'd like to start off here. In your opinion, do you think that Vladimir Putin didn't quite think this one through when he went and paid this visit to North Korea and signed these agreements with Kim Jong Un?
Well, I actually beg to differ. I think this is part of a strategy. This was very well thought through, and it's not just symbolic. Vladimir Putin is conducting a world war against the Western alliances. Ukraine was the first hot war in his Cold War when he invaded Ukraine. And when you're fighting an adversary, it's helpful if you open a second or third front in your war, because this distracts them, and it also forces them to diversify their resources to meet the attacks in the other fronts. I submit that the second front he opened was October 7th by having Hamas attack Israel. And that, of course, has led to the Gaza mess and crisis. And he was training Hamas soldiers, terrorists were being trained by Wagner mercenaries in Syria. Ukraine tipped off Netanyahu this was about to happen. He ignored their tip-off, and the rest is history. And October 7th also happens to be Putin's birthday. Mm-hmm. The other front that Putin has been trying to open is, of course, he would love nothing more than for China to try and invade Taiwan. He talks about it a lot. He whips up interest in it. But China is both too smart and too embedded and co-opted by the fact that their American and European customers would not like this very much, besides the fact that the United States 7th Fleet is there and they've pledged to protect Taiwan. So it's a crazy idea. China also has some economic and debt problems, which would impede it from, being expansionist at this point. So what he's done is he has stoked the flames of unrest and anxiety in a third region. He's gone from Europe and Ukraine to Israel, Gaza, and now he's trying to set one Korea, again, the North against South Korea again. And he's got China upset. China has been very guarded in their response to this. It's not a trilateral deal. They weren't invited, and I don't think they would have gone in if they had been invited. The South Koreans are upset, and so are the Japanese. And, what people have to understand is that Japan and South Korea dwarf Russia in economic size. Japan is twice the economy of Russia, and South Korea is almost the size of Russia. So he's taking on two extremely Western-oriented, wealthy nations with strong militaries. And what I think is going to happen is they're both going to go nuclear. They're both going to devise nuclear weapons.
All right, you mentioned them taking off South Korea and Japan, who are also very, very strong nations, as well as kind of fostering a front now between the West and, of course, the alliance of Putin, North Korea, and China, and the like. But you also mentioned the fact that maybe this is not a miscalculation, but something that Putin is pursuing. So how do we put these two and two together? What is in the calculation that make him decide that this is a good idea to provoke countries that almost has the same economic power as Russia?
Well, when you're taking on the West and the United States and all of its allies, which include Russia, of course, and many others, Japan and South Korea, you want to open up extra fronts in your war because it forces people to be distracted, their attention from, the first event. And this is what the Germans and the Japanese did in the Second World War. So this is an old strategy, and I think he has wanted to stoke trouble. What his original intention was to convince China to invade Taiwan. And that would have meant diversification of military resources, political attention, and capital from the Ukrainian war and the Gaza war to now a third problem. And that was what he wanted to do. But the Chinese are not buying this. They never, they may covet Taiwan, but they're in no condition economically or in any other way to go and try and snatch Taiwan. And also, it must be remembered that Stalin, the Russian dictator that Putin admires the most, pulled a stunt like this by convincing, by signing a deal with the North Korean leader at the time, is the grandfather of the existing leader, to invade South Korea, and got China mixed up in it, and that led to the Korean War. So this is not something that people should take lightly. I think that South Korea has already, and Japan, been increasingly involved in helping Ukraine, financially, humanitarian aid. But South Korea is one of the biggest arms manufacturers and ammunition manufacturers on the world, and they have been replenishing the supplies of ammunition the Americans have given to Ukraine by selling them ammunition. So indirectly, they're definitely involved. So this is mischief. This is trying to stoke more trouble, distract attention. This is classic Vladimir Putin.
What about China in this situation? You mentioned that they might not be so happy about this move by Vladimir Putin. Certainly, they must be quite concerned about the rising tensions in the region as a result of this. The reaction of South Korea, Japan, and even the United States. I believe the United States is now paying closer attention to that part of the world, and obviously that's got to be concerning for the Chinese.
Exactly what Putin wanted. The Chinese are not going to bite. They're not going to go along with it. It's not a trilateral deal. Their initial remarks by their diplomats and their mouthpiece, the Global Times, was very guarded and raised some concerns about stability. They're not leaping at their feet saying, oh, that's great, we want to join it, let's invade South Korea. They have to be concerned when Putin goes around pushing around Japan and South Korea, who are enormously wealthy. China's going to end up being surrounded by two more nuclear powers. And by the way, China is just as worried and concerned about North Korea and its odd or strange leadership with nuclear as anybody is. And so, making a deal with a country that is run by that is essentially a gulag, that has a population that's starving but has nuclear weapons, is not something that China or anybody else would want to do. But Russia's doing it because they're getting exactly the kind of concern that they want. He's trying to light as many fires around the world as he can. This to Vladimir Putin is a world war.
Right, it's definitely something very alarming. And so thank you so much for giving us your input and insight. Our guest is Diane Francis, editor-at-large, Canada's National Post. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.